Let's continue the conversation about rumination, and this is the most important conversation about rumination. Why do people pleasers ruminate? Why do they have such profound confusion? The reason is because when you have narcissistic parents, they negate you entirely. Because they project on you all the time, meaning they do not have empathy for the children. They always make presumptions about what you think, what you feel, and they dominate you chronically. And what this does is it profoundly negates the experience of that person. You see, when you are negated to that degree, there is no acknowledgement for who you are. You do not have the freedom to experience your own identity in that environment. You also learn that you only get love through the validation of your parents. You make them happy. That is your survival strategy. And so what happens with people that are people pleasers is they ruminate because they experience perpetual self-doubt and confusion. And the analysis that they continue to implore is trying to resolve this self-doubt and confusion that is resultant from narcissistic abuse, entire negation. And so they live where their own experience of themselves becomes totally externalized. They experience their own validity, their lovability, their self, their value, their self-worth through the validation of their parents. And in order to survive that childhood, they had to adapt in an environment where they were nearly invisible or totally invisible on a personal level. And so this causes nearly an identity that is externalized. And so what happens is that the people pleaser needs external validation to experience their own value. And they analyze everything. They analyze everything to try to understand. The understanding that occurs in rumination is almost like an intervention on the natural process through which human beings would normally ascertain reality. Reality and understanding reality is an automatic process of the mind that does not require rumination or analysis. And dissociating into analysis is a way to mitigate the trauma of the moment through which we live. When we see things that trouble us as people pleasers, we try to understand them so we could reframe them to mitigate the impact. And we do that more profoundly as we go through time, because as a person with a negated experience, your own emotions are not able to be expressed in this environment, and so they accumulate. And you behave in an inauthentic manner, being nice, learning that you can never say no, because in an environment where you have narcissistic parents, no is punishable. And so you have profound fear of saying no. And so if you can't say no when you want to say yes, you're not even authentically expressing yourself. And so the whole structure of being a people pleaser is an inauthentic way of existing that is catered to narcissists, where there's always a presumption of guilt, fault, blame. And it has to be paired with confusion, because the confusion is the dissociation from what's really happening. See, you have to dissociate from what's really happening in order to devalue yourself, in order to stop being abused. You have to be agreeable with the projections. You have to be agreeable with the abuse in order to actually reduce the abuse. You see, if you stood up for yourself as a child against a narcissistic parent, it would only create more abuse. You learned you cannot stand up for yourself. You have to agree. You have to agree. And if you don't, you're going to be punished further. And so people pleasers always presume guilt. They always assume that they did something wrong and are confused about it, and they want to know what they did wrong. And so people pleasers go through life analyzing everything because they experience great uncertainty about what's really taking place. Being a people pleaser is being a pre-borderline. It is literally the same structure of personality as borderline personality disorder, with very, very poor reality testing, because it involves profound idealizations. You see, they idealize a narcissist because they had to idealize their parents to mitigate the trauma of being in an environment that they had no control. People pleasing is also an effort to experience control over an environment that's uncontrollable, to try to normalize the experience of the child just to survive that environment. That you see the best in people. And then you're imbued with a false sense of security through this idea that you can change people. The hypervigilance is due to the survival of the child, meaning they become very observant of the emotional states of people in their environment, because that enables them to try to strategize and structure the way that they're going to deal with this. And that's why they are addicted to trying to keep people happy. They want to keep someone happy because that's where they experience love. That's where they experience affinity, connection, belonging. It's the only way, but it's also how they prevent abuse. And so they're conditioned to feel guilt, shame. They're conditioned to have profound barriers encasing them in fear, because that is what would enable them to avoid behaviors that would be triggering or result in a continuation or acceleration of abuse in an environment with narcissistic parents. And so this pattern of experiencing others will then persist through life, where they have profound difficulty saying no, profound confusion. When they get confronted, there's a bifurcation where intellectually you can see things that are happening, but emotionally the way you experience is very different than reality. But because of the profound power of those emotional drives, the decision making is always going to be a path of least emotional pain. Saying yes and agreeing to something you don't want to do is often less scary than saying no, because people pleasers are always saying things like, I'm conflict avoidant. So being conflict avoidant, saying I see the best in other people, saying I'm a very understanding person. The understanding is how we reframe reality to be something that's palatable, but also helps preserve the idealization of other people, meaning that we become attached to the good feelings that we get through the validation of other people. And in order to preserve the attachment, we have to eliminate the things that they do that would be inconsistent with the idealization, meaning that, somebody gets cheated on, they want to understand why. Why did this happen? What did I do wrong? And they're open to being gaslit. They're open to being lied to perpetually, because that helps preserve the idealization. People pleasers devalue themselves to validate the abuser, to preserve the idealization of the abuser, to hold on to the fantasy, because people pleasers live in a dark world because they don't even know what being acknowledged looks like, because they never are being themselves. Everything a people pleaser does to try to achieve validation validates underlying notions of their own not being good enough, being broken, or having something wrong with them that they attempt to mitigate by adding value to the lives of other people. The problem is that being externally validated never validates or never acknowledges the nature of the true person. And so the love that a people pleaser wants is not available through people pleasing, because the behavior itself is totally inauthentic. If you're doing things you don't really want to do, if you're doing things just to make other people happy, you're not even being yourself, so how could anybody really know and love you? People pleasers will recognize, oh my gosh, they only want me because I do this or I do that. They'll see that people love and validate the things that they do, the services they provide, the value they provide. But what about me? You see, the people pleasing lives in a dissociated reality where they don't even know themselves without the external validation. And so that's the challenge. You have to let go of the I'm not good enough. You have to let go of the I'm broken. You have to let go of the false notions of self that keep it all together.